Welcome to the Detachment 842 podcast, where we provide you information about Air Force RTC. If you're interested in becoming a better leader, you found the right place. Here's your host, Cadet Andrew Estrada.
Howdy runners, and welcome to another episode of our Detachment 842 podcast. Today we've got a very special guest, our very own Deputy Commander of Air Force RTC, Colonel Colonel Ramsby. Sir, I want to thank you for coming out and just spending some time with us. I know you've got a busy day at our detachment. We just kind of want to get into, your educational background and your career history real quick.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. It's just as important for us to get out and be able to visit with you and see what you guys are doing, as well as for you guys to hear from us as to what's going on at the headquarters to help you guys maneuver appropriately. So my education background, I am an ROTC product. I came through Detachment 220 at Purdue University. In electrical engineering was my degree. Was originally assessed into the Air Force as a 6-2E, but was during my first assignment to Air Force Space Command at Peterson, which was an operational tour that 6-2Es have to go through. They still do that today. I had the opportunity to transition into what was then the 3-3S career field, which is now 17D, or Cyberspace Operations. Communications back then, Cyberspace Operations now. So very glad to be here, very glad to get to spend some time with you guys today.
Thank you, sir. So the first thing we kind of wanted to get into is a lot of our viewers, being kind of new cadets at the detachment, some of them don't have really any background of the Air Force at all. So one thing we wanted you to kind of explain is what exactly is cyberspace ops and what's its mission for the Air Force and how does it play such a vital role?
Yeah, so cyberspace operations, people will look at it and say, oh, this is just this mysterious thing, but actually it's everywhere you are. And so how many of you out there allow your mobile phone to be more than 20 feet away from you at any one time? When's the last time you spent a day or even an hour without having access to your phone? That's cyberspace and everything that goes into it. It's the hardware, it's the software, it's the human element. And when you think about that on a larger scale, from a military perspective, name one thing we do in the military that's not touched or founded or grounded in cyberspace. And so when you look at America's way of war right now, which is stealth and precision, meaning I can get someplace at a time and place of my choosing, you don't know I'm there, and I can precisely put whatever means of, whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic, in order to do something to affect change in your behavior because that's what I want to happen. How do I do that? I do that through connectivity. I do that through the ability for a lot of sensors to be able to talk to each other on a large scale, all the way down to that individual, whatever means I choose, again, kinetic or non-kinetic, to precisely hit what I want, when I want, how I want to create the exact effect that I'm trying to do. How we do that? We do that through cyberspace. And of course you have the space assets and the air assets and the ground assets and the sea assets that go along with it. But all of those domains together are what helps make the American military way of war what it is today. It helps us create that advantage we have over our competitors and our adversaries, is our ability to take what we have and be able to outmaneuver and outthink them in a way that creates so many dilemmas that they are unable to respond. And when they're unable to respond, then that means we have the initiative. And when we have the initiative, then that means we are able to then do our will, whatever it is that we're trying to do, in order to change their behavior.
So that makes a lot of sense just because of, obviously we live in a world where technology is advancing so fast beyond, anything we've seen in past wars or use in the military. And it's kind of a scary thing to think about of, a war in a cyberspace, so to speak, is almost more important than a conventional sense of war because of how dependent everyone is on it. Technology with like GPS and things of that nature is just so vital to military operations now, that it's like kind of like the backbone. What, as an officer in cyberspace ops, what kind of is your role? Because I know a lot of officers come into the Air Force active duty, and maybe their job is, they have tons of airmen that that are kind of under their wing that they're taking care of, and then some officers come in and they're the subject matter expert, they're doing the research, all that stuff. So what's kind of the balance of that coming in as an officer in cyberspace ops?
Yeah, and so when you come in as an officer in cyberspace, you need to really be thinking about kind of three different lines of effort. The first one is what they call the Department of Defense Information Networks, or DOTIN. And that is all the connectivity. So you come in the morning, you log into your computer, that's the Department of Defense Information Network. Or it could be, I am doing something and I'm planning some type of a maneuver of some sort, and I'm working on a classified network. That's also the Department of Defense Information Network. And that's just those are those airmen that are in the background that are providing that capability to you. Then the next one is what they call defensive cyberspace operations. How do you protect those systems from keeping people who shouldn't need to, or who do not need to be using that system on that system? So how do you keep the bad guys out of your system in order to ensure that the good guys can use it for when they want, how they want, where they want, for whatever purpose they need it to be? Then the third one is offensive cyberspace operations. That means I'm going to go in, I'm going to kick down doors, and I am going to get into my competitors or my adversaries' networks, and I'm going to do whatever it is that I need to do, whether I'm passively collecting intelligence, all the way to, I'm creating a kinetic-like effect by doing some damage to whatever it is, whatever that network is connected to. So again, the three things that our airmen will be coming into would be Department of Defense Information Network operations, defensive cyberspace operations, and offensive cyberspace operations. From a Space Force perspective, they're going to be less interested in the DOTIN type stuff. That's going to be things that more of the Air Force and the Joint Force will provide on behalf of the Space Force. The Space Force is very, very much interested in the defensive cyberspace operations, about how do we defend the assets, the critical assets that we have, whether it is terrestrial or extraterrestrial, on the ground or in space, and how do we protect those systems. And then those things that we have the ability to then use in an offensive way, then there'll be guardians who will also have the capability to do that. But all of that, whether it's the Air Force or the Space Force, none of that is done unilaterally. That is done through the Department of Defense, and specifically through either Cyber Command or Space Command, as either supported or a support team command, in joint efforts with the rest of the combatant commands. And what is it that we have been asked to do on behalf of our nation?
So we're hearing kind of about all those different assignments that you've had in just different places you've been, within the cyberspace field. My understanding is that you were deployed multiple times in support of operations like Desert Fox and Southern Watch and Enduring Freedom. What does the deployment side of that AFROTC kind of look like, and how does the deployment change kind of your job, and so to speak?
Yeah, and so first time I deployed in support of Desert Fox, I was a part of the 16th Special Operations Wing at Hurlburt Field, Florida. And we actually went into, we deployed to Ali Al Salim, Kuwait, and set up a combat search and rescue forward operating location there. And from a communications perspective, anything and everything that came out of that command cell, my team was responsible for. And Desert Fox was done during the Clinton administration, and it was in direct response to some of the challenges they were having with Saddam Hussein at the time. So again, we set up a combat search and rescue element at Ali Al Salim, Kuwait. Southern Watch, that was the overflight, which was the remnants of Desert Storm, where we were controlling the airspace, specifically against the Saddam Hussein regime, and ensuring that who's using the airspace when, why, and for what purposes in order to protect our allies and our partners in that region. Along those lines. And then Enduring Freedom, multiple deployments associated with Enduring Freedom. First time I went through, I was the squadron commander for an expeditionary combat comm team that went into Bagram Air Base and bedded down the first F-15E Strike Eagles that were deployed to Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. Second time when I went back, and that was a 6-month deployment. Second time I went back was a 15-month deployment in support of Combined Joint Task Force. It was Combined Joint Task Force, Combined Joint Interagency Task Force 435, which was responsible for detainee operations and biometric collection across all of Afghanistan. So why did I tell you the specifics of those 3 deployments? As you can tell, each one of them was just a little bit different. Combat search and rescue, to providing combat comm, to providing communications support and cyberspace support for detainee operations and biometric collection. 17 Deltas in the Air Force or the Space Force, doesn't matter what they do, they can be a part of any mission in the Air Force because every mission relies on it. And again, if you understand the 5 core functions of the Air Force, air and space superiority, obviously the space is branched off into its own space force. Rapid global mobility, that's how we get things around the nation or around the world at time and place of our choosing, whether it's people or equipment. Global strike, meaning I can hit any target on the face of the earth at will, however, whatever means I want to do it. Command and control, meaning I can talk to whoever I want to in whatever manner I want to, provide information all around the globe and control those forces. And then intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. If you understand the 5 core functions of the Air Force, and now understand that the Space Force is its own, so space superiority, and that has its own set of core functions as well. When you understand those, you'll realize that 17 Deltas, whether it's cyberspace or communications or your intelligence or a lot of those other AFSCs that are out there, are actually needed in every one of those. So for those cadets that are interested in doing things like that and want to experience all of those things and not just 1 or 2 of those things, then those AFSCs are for them. And so one of the things that I have enjoyed the most out of being a cyberspace officer is that I get to fully understand and be a part of all 5 core functions of the Air Force, and now as a member of the Space Force.
I heard you touch on it a little bit in there, and we talked about it a little bit before the podcast, but what was the transition like? I know it was kind of recent where it was the transition from Air Force to Space Force, and a lot of those jobs you mentioned, I know that they have, the counterparts on both sides, like Intel and Cyberspace Ops. So what was that transition like for you? Because a lot of our cadets, the Space Force still is probably even more kind of out there than Air Force. Maybe they don't know about it. What was that transition kind of like for you, and how has it changed your job?
Yeah, the mission of the Space Force is not new. The space mission actually has its roots back into the early 1950s when they started developing intercontinental ballistic missiles. And that mission has evolved and grown since then. And so when you think about what the Space Force is today, it's not new. It's just what we've been doing, but it has more of an emphasis as the nature of warfare is evolving, and the need for us to protect critical assets on orbit that we need, both for our military life and our personal lives. It requires to have a force that's dedicated to doing that. The transition to the Space Force for me was an easy one. My first assignment coming out of Purdue back in the mid-90s was to Air Force Space Command in Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado. And I was an electrical engineer in a satellite operations management office. And basically what that meant is that office was responsible for managing the communications payloads on multiple satellite platforms that were on orbit. And so not only did I get to understand the Air Force missions, but I also got to understand and work with the Army as well as the Navy for those ground-based assets and the seaborne assets as well. Because everybody needs to talk to somebody at some point in time. And when you don't have direct hard line communications between 2 points, the only way to do it is via terrestrial means. Either I can do a line of sight through like a walkie-talkie, or I can bounce a signal off of the ionosphere to get over the horizon, or I go to a satellite so I can go to wherever I need to go. And so that was my first experience right out of ROTC. And when you look up at the moon, you look and you see the stars, there's something pretty cool about space. And it's that wonder, it's that what is out there, what can we be doing there, what should we be doing there. And now, in cadets that are coming into the Air Force and the Space Force now, in their career, if they stay an entire career, humans are going to land on Mars. Humans are actually going to step foot on Mars. And so when you think of it in those terms, it was an easy decision for me because it's what's out there, and also understanding that our basic fundamental way of war that the United States has and how we engage in war is dependent on both the cyberspace and the space layer. And so when you understand that, I just wanted to be where I thought in the next big fight, where the initiative is going to be won or lost is going to be in space and cyberspace. And to me, that's the sound of the gun, and I always go to the sound of the gun. That wasn't my only assignment in Space Command. I went back as a colonel, and the work that we did while I was there, and that was in 2016 and 2017, that really solidified how passionate I was about that space mission. And so when the opportunity to transfer from the Air Force to the Space Force came, it was a pretty easy decision for me because I have that passion to do it.
So it sounds like, obviously, clearly you have a lot of experience, operational and with joint functions and joint operations and all that. It makes me curious to wonder kind of what was your favorite assignment and what kind of makes you, what made it your favorite assignment?
Yeah, so my position has always been whatever assignment I'm in, that's my favorite assignment. So right now, my favorite assignment is being the Deputy Commander of Air Force ROTC. And I love it, and I'm passionate about that as well. I love teaching, I love helping others achieve something that's important to them, and I love watching somebody go from wanting to do something to actually doing it and doing it well, and I enjoy that. So wherever I'm at, that's always my favorite assignment. But I've had some good assignments as well. And again, when remember we talked about those 5 core functions, and when in those common AFSCs, you can be plug and play in any of those. And so I've done Space Command, I've done Air Force Special Operations Command, I've done Air Combat Command. I was even an assignment officer down at the Air Force Personnel Center and was doing comm officer assignments for a while. I've been a commander 5 times. And so that depth and breadth of experience, there's just no way to describe how rewarding it is. And every job brings a new level of excitement and challenge with it. And I kind of enjoy that, the change of scenery as well as the change of challenges. So again, wherever I'm at, that's my favorite assignment.
I know the term, there's no wrong answers always applies to things like this, but I think that was probably the best answer. So speaking on your current assignment, right, as the Deputy Commander at Headquarters Air Force ROTC, what kind of role does that play in AFROTC? Because at our level, you don't really get to see, even really region staff is kind of far out there for us. We see our cadre, and that's kind of how we get our information through the chain. So what role do you play in like the big picture?
Yeah, and so when you think of any military operation, you've got a tactical, an operational, and a strategic level. And so obviously at the detachment level, that's all tactical. all tactical. And you get to the region level, that's a little bit of tactical and a lot more operational. And then when you get to the headquarters level, it's a little bit operational, but a lot more strategic. And so, as the vice commander or deputy commander of ROTC, I want to be looking over the horizon so that we can create time and space for the DET commanders to do what they need to do at their levels to ensure that we are building and creating, whether we are bringing them into the program, or helping them grow in the program, or commissioning them out of the program, the absolute best world-class officers for the Air Force and the Space Force. And so, at the headquarters level, I've been a DET commander, so I don't need to be a DET commander anymore. What I need to be doing is I need to be working at that strategic level to ensure that, one, the detachments have the resources they need in order to function appropriately, and do the things that we're asking them to do. Additionally, you have to coordinate between the DETs and the regions and Headquarters Air University, Headquarters Air Education and Training Command, Headquarters Air Force A1. And any of the other organizations that have an interest in Air Force ROTC in the generation of airmen and guardians. And so, having that experience as a DET commander gives me allows me to be empathetic about some of the decisions that are being made. What is the implications to those that are actually in the trenches on a day-to-day basis? And how is it going to impact their ability to maneuver in order, again, to build that world-class officer, whether it's an airman or a guardian. So a lot of my time at that level, and when you get as old as I am, it's a lot of thinking, it's a lot of strategy, it's a lot of paperwork, but there's some reward in it at the same time, because when you look out across 145 detachments that are in 47 states, 2 in Puerto Rico. The only 3 states that we're not currently in right now are Idaho, Rhode Island, and Maine. So think about that span of influence across all of those units and organizations. That's where that reward comes in, because if you get it right 145 times. But there's risk associated with it as well, because if you get it wrong 145 times as well. And the detachments will not hesitate, whether it's cadets or cadre, to let us know that we got it wrong. And if we got it wrong, then we need to take a step back and fix it so that we can get it right. And again, what is our goal? What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to develop world-class airmen and guardians. And not world-class airmen and guardians to prepare to fight the fight that I fought, but to prepare you for the fight that you're going to fight. And if you look back just historically, just from the 20th century on, World War II looked a lot different than World War I. A lot of the same nations that were fighting against each other, but you went from trench warfare to mechanized warfare and air warfare from World War I to World War II. And then from World War II, then you get into the Cold War, which was, that's kind of a lot different than force on force in open field and fighting. And then you also had Korea and Vietnam in there. And those looked a lot different as well. Then you get into Desert Storm. Now we're talking about precision and stealth. And that looks a lot different than World War I, World War II, the Cold War, Vietnam, Korea. And then you get into the global war on terror, which is literally 9/11 and beyond. And that was kind of the fight that I've been fighting. Kind of, I've been in the Air Force or Space Force for 27 years. Of those, 20 of those years have been no kidding, in direct conflict. And the previous 7 to that were kind of sort of in conflict for a while. And so what is it that I should be doing as the Deputy Commander of ROTC? What I should be doing is doing everything I can to make sure that you are prepared for your war And that war is going to look a lot different than what my war was. And so if you kind of look at it, what does that mean? Well, take a look at that. You got your laptop right there. You got your phone. Typically, it's in your pocket or someplace. When you go to put gas in your car, when's the last time you walked in and paid them cash, or did you just use your debit card or your ATM card right there? And so, because our daily lives rely on all of this interconnectivity, if I do something to interrupt that, I literally have interrupted your way of life. So in World War II, in order to get direct access to the population, Hitler had to cross the English Channel for the British people. He had to cross the English Channel and hit them kinetically, and his means was through the air, because he wasn't going to hit them. He wasn't going to get it by sea. And so that's when you have the Battle of Britain. But you had those fielded forces protecting your population to the best of their ability. In your war, our adversaries have direct access to our population, because I can either influence you through that medium, or I can do something to take that medium away from you. And when I take that medium away from you, now all of a sudden, what if your only access to your money is through your bank account that you use that card, but that card no longer works? And if I do that on a massive scale, what impact does that have on the population? And can I then influence that population through means that do not involve gunpowder and force on force in an open field? So you asked a very simple question, but it has a very again, strategic answer. What should I be doing for you? What I should be doing is I should be doing everything now to prepare you both physically and mentally for the war you're going to fight, and it's not going to look anything like the war I just fought.
And what you said, sir, about, obviously the big picture for ROTC, right, is like you said, it's to produce airmen and guardians that are going to be able to take care of the mission, and not just take care of it, but to take care of it at an excellent level. It's right there in our core values, being excellence. And here at Detachment 842, one of our mottos is commission exceptional officers. Right? Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line, is you don't want just bare minimum. And another thing you were talking about was, kind of being able to protect the detachments through things that can come in and just interrupt your daily life. And the elephant in the room that's kind of been here for a while now is obviously the nature of ROTC with COVID. And we've seen on a lower level, like on our day-to-day lives, how this virtual nature of ROTC, which I'm sure at every detachment has experienced it, some more than others, of being virtual. But how has it affected you at a higher level, and what has it kind of had you put your mind towards for being able to help out the detachments fighting through that kind of phase of, like, all of our training is shifting because we can't meet in person, PT can't be in person, things of that nature. Obviously it's getting better, but for a while it wasn't. So like I said, what kind of what effects did that have on you at your level?
Yeah, so the impacts across COVID and the global pandemic, it has the impacts that exactly have what you would think it would be. How has COVID impacted you personally? So here in talking with your DET commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman, I think this is the first time you guys have been in person for about a year.
For a steady amount of time, yes, sir.
For a steady amount of time, and so in class teaching and lead labs and PT and all those other types of things. So think about, over the course of the last 18 months, what was the impact of COVID on you? Now take that and multiply it by 15,000 for all of the cadets across our 145 detachments, and that's the level. That's what COVID has done to us. And then there are some that COVID has impacted them very personally, whether it has made them sick, or it has made someone that they care about sick, or even worse, somebody that they cared about didn't survive after getting it. So you have to look at it from that perspective. Now, in the actual execution of ROTC, you've got to look at it from, military training typically is very hands-on. That interaction you and I get by being face-to-face here. If I'm right here, I can kind of, especially like when we're at PT this morning, and you've got your freshmen that are just coming on campus, just coming into the program. Some of them may not have had any military experience whatsoever. Some of them may have never done push-ups on a regular basis until now. And so simple things such as when they're doing push-ups, that in-person interaction is irreplaceable because I can help them develop that proper form. And if you don't have the proper form, I don't care how strong you are, you're not going to max the PFA when you take it, because your form will create enough inefficiency. If it's wrong, will create enough inefficiency, you will not be able to do 67 push-ups in 60 seconds on the men's if you want to max it. So that in-person interaction and my ability for me to do something and show them what right looks like, you cannot replace that, and you can't do it virtually. So those cadets that haven't been doing PT in person and they've been doing it at home, when you're doing PT by yourself, you're doing it exactly perfect. In your mind, everything is exactly the way it should be. And you know what I'm talking about. And so, but having somebody come in and say, boy, I'm not sure you're going down, you're not breaking 90 degrees. Okay? Again, now put that on a global, on a national scale, times 15,000. There are some universities that did not have any in-person classes. There were cadets that went to field training last summer that had not had any in-person interaction prior to going to field training. And so some of them performed really well, and some of them struggled because of it. And so we have to look at the pandemic as, one, it's a crisis, but in every crisis there's opportunity. And so it's not about what I can or cannot do in COVID versus a non-COVID environment. It's what are the capabilities at my disposal that I can use in any environment. And so obviously COVID allowed us to really stretch out and exercise virtual capabilities. But from those virtual capabilities, some of those should carry on even after COVID is no longer an issue for us. And so, for example, one of the things that we did at DET 225 at Notre Dame was that virtual environment allowed family members to participate in our military celebrations that they would have never otherwise gotten to see, such as commissionings or award ceremonies or things of those nature. And I'm not talking about mom and dad who would have stopped what they were doing in order to do it, but I'm talking about grandma and grandpa or aunt, uncle, or cousin, or best friend. Those that don't know anything about the military, these virtual capabilities have now allowed them to be a part of us, and it helps us tell them their story, and then it allows them to tell our story to other people, so that people have a better understanding of what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. And so the challenges with COVID, obviously, they're obvious, but there's some goodness that comes out of it as well, because now we have capabilities that's on a global scale that we didn't have prior to.
And I think that's kind of, the story of a lot of instances that you'll come into throughout ROTC, your time as active duty. It's just that a lot of the challenges that we face, where we have to be flexible and kind of move around, is where you learn some of the biggest lessons and where you can later apply it. I want to backtrack a little bit. I know you touched on field training a bit. Obviously, that's something that was, like you said, hugely impacted by COVID, not just because of all the virtual training and the differences in training that were prior, that cadets kind of were able to get, but just the sheer numbers that went to field training, right? Because, like my class, I'm now in AS 400, but at the time AS 300, I just got back from field training because when I was supposed to go after my 200 year, obviously there wasn't a lot of slots, because that was when COVID was like really hitting hard and it just wasn't feasible to send everybody. My understanding, I think, was that some of the shells were like some of the biggest encampments we've ever had in ROTC. What were some of the big takeaways from field training as a whole this past summer?
Yeah, so summer of 21 field training is going to go down, and people are going to remember that for a very long time. And so, and again, it's a direct result of field training 20. And so in field training 20 at Maxwell, one, we had to reduce the number of cadets that could even go. And then two, once they got there, again, we were just on the front end of COVID. You know, COVID hit us in force in that early March, April timeframe of 20, and we had we were supposed to have cadets show up at Maxwell in May. That whole first Max was canceled because of the unknowns. You know, how bad is this going to be? Did we have the resources to address it? You know, could we train in that environment? And because we couldn't answer all of the get to all the answers about how do we mitigate that risk, the first encampment was the first Max, first FTU was canceled, which then pushed everything into the second FTU. And Colonel Fred Thaden and his team came together in that July-August timeframe and were able to get about 1,200 cadets through that. But it wasn't without challenge of restriction of movement, challenge of COVID testing, challenge of social distancing, challenge of, you know, wearing a mask when we're not used to wearing masks, all of that type of stuff. And so they were able to continue the mission, and they were able to get those numbers through. But what that meant was 1,500 did not get the chance to go. As a congressionally mandated event, field training is something that you have to do prior to commissioning. And so fast forward into summer of 21, now I've got the rising juniors that need to go through field training, and we've got those that were deferred from field training 20 at no fault of their own. It's just we just didn't have the ability to get them through. So now we're talking at we've got a large challenge we got to fight our way through. And so Colonel Jason Patla, who's currently the Northwest Region Commander, was put in charge of a Tiger team to say, what are our courses of action to get after this on a large scale? And they went through all of the analysis and development of what were those courses of action should be, what the pros and cons are, and created the decision space for ultimately Lieutenant General Hecker, the Area University Commander, to give a go or no-go for field training in summer of 21. And the decision was go, and because of the numbers, we had to move it to someplace larger than Maxwell, because Maxwell could not handle that capacity. So they selected Camp Shelby, Mississippi. And Camp Shelby, that's not the first time we've gone through Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Back in I think as early as 2017, cadets would do some expeditionary training at Camp Shelby, so it was not a completely foreign thing. However, in the way that we addressed it was, and basically what Colonel Paul Tombarge and his team did is they built and deployed an air expeditionary wing about the equivalent of the size of the United States Air Force Academy, and headquartered at Camp Shelby for 77 days. In those 77 days, we put through six shells and almost 3,500 cadets through there. But it was not without its challenges. Those that went through field training know that there was a laundry issue. Those that went through field training knows that there was food issues. Those that went through Camp Shelby knows that it was hot and humid and all of those things that go along with it. But the things that we do in the Air Force and in the Space Force and in the military in general, when you deploy, guess what, guys? That's what it's going to be. There's going to be laundry issues. There's going to be food issues. There's going to be challenges with the weather. There's going to be challenges with things like that. So in that air expeditionary wing environment, he actually got kind of a deployment feel out of it in addition to the field training as well. So those that went through Camp Shelby can almost look back as if they've been on their first deployment already. And that's a positive thing because when you get on the Air Force or when you get into the active duty Air Force or the Space Force, you're going to deploy because America fights its wars away from its shores, not inside its borders. At least we try to keep it that way. And so that will be something that some folks will look back and say, yeah, I already did that deployment. Some of them will think of it in a good light. Some of it will think of it in a not so good light because there were some challenges associated with it. But ultimately, what we were able to do, and really at the credit of Colonel Paul Tombarge and his team, which was about 420 or so cadre members from across the Air Force ROTC enterprise, is that they got almost 3,500 cadets through that training. It was standardized, and so the cadets that were evaluated in Shell 1, which was the first one, and Shell Charlie, which was the last one, were nearly identical. And so the experience, although each one of them was just slightly different, on average the standardization was unlike anything we've seen in the past. And we were able to completely clear that backlog from those that were not able to go in Field Training 21, so now we're back on course. So Field Training 22 will be back at Maxwell, and it will be through the typical numbers, which is roughly around that 2,000 or so point that are going to go through there. And but that does not mean COVID will not still be a part of that environment. Still does not mean we're not going to have the restriction of movement. You know, whatever that looks like and whatever COVID is in that at that time will adjust, and the environment is appropriate.
Sir, I don't know if this is a question you can answer, but do you think that there will be future plans to use Camp Shelby for field training?
I think Camp Shelby, but Camp Shelby or any of those other things that helps enhance our field training, I think we should always consider them. Doesn't mean that those resources would always be available. So we just happen to be lucky with Camp Shelby that Camp Shelby is typically on a 5-year cycle. So for 4 of those 5 years, they really focus on training Army units. And then that 5th year, then they kind of open it up to their joint partners. And we just happened to catch it in that year where they opened it up for the joint partners. Doesn't mean that they couldn't fit us in there, but it would take a little bit more coordination in order to do that. But we did it at Camp Shelby. But is there someplace else that would enhance field training as well? And again, we will look at that on a case-by-case basis, going into every field training to ensure, are we providing the training, the standardized training, and the objectives that we're trying to meet in field training, whether we can do it at Maxwell or do we need to do it someplace else. But I would tell you the facilities at Maxwell are getting much, much better. The dormitories are getting remodeled. We've now added our own ROTC dojo. For those that have been to a Maxwell field training knows what I'm talking about when I talk about a dojo. ROTC has its own dojo there now. And we're working with OTS in order to improve the Vigilant Warrior capabilities as well as the facilities around Maxwell. So every year we should strive for field training to be just a little bit better than the year before. And Field Training 22 is on track to do that, getting it back to Maxwell.
Sir, as someone who did go through this past summer, I completely agree, especially on your earlier point of there was a lot of character building, I feel like, and I think that's a great thing, that not everything was perfect, because it kind of teaches you that, like, that's just how the world is, and that's, like you said, how deployments are going to be and things of that nature. And to any of the cadets watching that haven't been to field training yet, I learned so much there, and it seemed like one of those scary things, as I'm sure it will for anyone who joins ROTC, but it really was an awesome experience, and yeah, I feel like I learned so much just in my short time there. Backtracking a little bit more, so kind of stepping back from the headquarters level, but as your time at Notre Dame as the detachment commander, what kind of pushed you to want to be an ROTC in the first place, to become an ROTC instructor, and to kind of move into this path of your career?
Yeah, and so coming through ROTC, I loved being a cadet. I was good at being a cadet, and that never leaves you. And then so if you stay in the Air Force or the Space Force long enough, you'll get those opportunities to go back. And so that opportunity presented itself, and it's very competitive, especially at the 06 level. It's extremely competitive. And so, but I had the support of my leadership. Submitted my application, and luckily I was selected, and selected to go to. I would have gone to any detachment, but in my year there were 5 detachments that were open, and I listed Notre Dame as my number 1 choice, and was luckily selected for that. Notre Dame is exactly what you would think it is. Exactly, they're very good at their brand. And it's exactly what you see in how it's portrayed. It's about it's about characters of leaders, or it's about leaders of character. And that can manifest itself in many ways. Obviously, at Notre Dame, being a Catholic school, there's that Catholic side and that religious side of it. But it's more than that. It's leaders of character regardless of your faith. And those are that's the one thing that I enjoyed the most at Notre Dame, is that helping develop those leaders of character. And a lot of those students were very devout Catholics. So they've got characters of faith, but they also got characters of leadership with character, and a lot of those characters are about compassion. And so that's didn't know what to think about it before going into it, but looking back on it, it was a great place to be. I would have gone anywhere, but I'm very glad that I was selected to go there. And again, it comes down to building those leaders of character. So what do I mean by that? Because each of the cadets that commission into the Air Force, at some point in time, whether they stay for 4 years or they stay for 30 or beyond, there will be a point in that time where just the nature of our business is going to challenge your character. And do you know what right looks like? And sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not. What decision are you going to make? What decision are you going to make if somebody's watching? And what decision are you going to make if you think nobody's watching? Are they the same decision? So when I talk about that leader of character, that's what I'm talking about. And that particular detachment, that particular school, is all about developing leaders of character. And not only is it reinforced in the ROTC curriculum, but it's reinforced in every other class in that institution. And to me, that was extremely important and rewarding.
One question I had for you that was kind of specific to Notre Dame, being where your detachment was located, that I feel like this would play a really big part into becoming an officer in today's Air Force, because the Air Force loves its traditions, it loves its legacy, as much as it does love preparing for that future fight, like you were saying. I feel like, in my experience, that Notre Dame is really rich in its traditions and its culture that's already kind of like set there. So as a detachment commander of cadets that go to school there and that probably have their ties to that school, how do you balance the tradition and the culture of that detachment, but still try to strive for progress and for making things better wherever they can be?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And so I will tell you, again, we talked about it a little bit earlier. If all I do is prepare you for the last war, I have failed you. And so that's exactly the approach that I took at 225, is that I'm not there to prepare those cadets for the last war. I've got to prepare them for the unknown, for what's coming. And so how do you go about doing that? Well, in ROTC, a lot of the things that I've seen in ROTC is that you just do exactly so when you were a freshman and now you're a senior, are the things that you're doing now exactly what you did when you were a freshman? And some of them need to be that way, but do all of them need to be that way? And are you challenging yourself on what it is that now, as a senior, what is it that you want to instill in those freshmen? Do you want it to be exactly what happened, what the experiences that you went through? Or do you want to critically look at it and say that, as with everything else, and especially in today's day and age, everything is constantly changing. Today I've got the latest and greatest phone. How long is that the latest and greatest phone? Not very long. 6 months, a year, until the next iteration comes out. How many people do you see carrying around flip phones? I know flip phones are coming back, but they're coming back in a much different way. But the old flip phones, the ones probably your mom or your dad or your grandparents may still have. And if they were to give you that, would that still be as effective if I gave you that brand new iPhone or that brand new Samsung device or whatever? And so you've got to step back and take a look at it and says, does it need to look like today? Not based on exactly what I went through, but based on what I think it needs to be. So I challenged specifically my AS400, AS400s. I did teach the AS400 class, and I specifically challenged them to step back and to be able to take a look and say, okay guys, going into every single lead lap, going into every single op order, going into every single event, what is it that you're trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? and how are you going to go about it? Do you have the resources you need? What is the impact? Is it a good decision only at your level, or what's the implications to the cadets that are going to have to then implement what their plan was? And for them to be able to step back and look at it and say, oh, and in fact, we actually even took a field trip to DET 220 at Purdue and allowed those cadets to talk to each other, and the benefit of that cross communication. We saw some great things that they were doing, they saw some great things that we were doing, but both of us walked away with better ways to get after the same problems. And so I'll go back to our two previous commanders-in-chief to kind of reinforce what I'm trying to get after. General Goldfein, we'll start with General Brown. General Brown, if you listen to what General Brown is saying right now, you'll hear a lot of accelerate, change, or lose. Okay? And what is he saying? What he's saying is the old way of doing business is not gonna help you win the next fight. You're gonna have to evolve. You're gonna have to understand your competitors, your adversaries. You're gonna have to understand the environment of which we'll be operating in, or control the environment that we want to create in order to operate and do what we want to do when we want to do it. General Goldfein was saying very much the same thing, but he said it in a different way. And how he stated it is that to think big, start small, and scale fast. But together, the two of them are on the same platform, and they're saying, guys, gals, you have to listen to us. The threats out there are really real, and in order for us to be as prepared as we possibly can be, we have to look at these things a little bit different. We need to innovate in ways that we haven't thought about. We need the same problems that we have been trying to get through. If we approach it from a different way and use other things in order to solve it, one, we can be more efficient, or maybe we can solve it in a better way. So how do you do that? So the challenge is, not only for DET 225, and any of those cadets that are there can reaffirm this, is that we should be challenging each other at every detachment across all of ROTC, and says, what is it that we're trying to do? What problem are we trying to solve? And are we doing it in the most efficient and best way, so that we are achieving our goals and objectives sooner and in a more positive way than maybe some way that we may have done it in the past. And there are some things and traditions that are just going to carry on, and we acknowledge that, and we're good to go with that. But we should deliberately acknowledge that, not do it out of complacency. And all those other things, the environment is going to change so fast, and the environment is changing so fast right now, that if you don't adapt to it, you will be overcome by that environment, and then you will become reactive, which is typically less beneficial than being proactive.
In ROTC, kind of one of the, just on the general topic of leadership, right? It kind of seems as this redundant idea, I guess, if you will, where it's like, as a commander, as cadre, you're teaching people how to lead while simultaneously leading them. Or I guess saying it vice versa might make more sense, where you're leading people and you're also teaching them how to lead at the same time. And so one thing that's kind of unique about that is, well, it's unique to the officers, not necessarily just to the officer side, but it's more so a common theme in the officer side, right? Because yes, we are cadets, but eventually you're like training us to step into your shoes. What are some of the differences in your style of leadership that you had to make when you stepped into that role from being on the operational side, where you're not necessarily teaching people how to lead, you're teaching them let's get the mission done. Now it's like long term, you're trying to teach people how to lead people to get the mission done. So what were kind of some of the key differences, and did you have to make any changes to your style of leadership?
I looked at to me, both of those are exactly the same. Whether I'm leading airmen or guardians at the operational level to get the mission done, I use the exact same leadership style that I used in ROTC. And what do I mean by that? Each one of us has our own individual leadership style. Some are just going to step out and draw fire and get the job done, and sometimes they'll do it alone, or they may have a couple of folks with them, but in the end they still get the job done. Then there are those that are really good at bringing others along with them. And there are everybody who's kind of in between. And do you lead with compassion, or do you lead with discipline, or do you lead with, what is your leadership style? For me, it has taken an entire career for me to become comfortable with my leadership style. And the way that I'm definitely one that I'll step out and draw fire, but I'll be sensitive at the same time when I need to be sensitive. And what do I mean by that? So we'll use COVID as the example. So a crisis, you don't build leaders. You can teach leadership, but leadership is a choice.
So in that point that you just hit, two of the main lessons that I've learned that you kind of touched on were, one, you really got to learn your style of leadership. You can always adapt and change it to things that you want to see, but at the end of the day, it's got to be genuine and true to yourself, because if you're trying to do something that's not you, your followers are probably going to pick up on it. And then two is just that you can't proclaim yourself. You can't use a position to make yourself a leader. Being a leader is something that comes natural, and it's people choosing to follow you that makes you a leader, rather than you saying, this is my position, I'm in charge type of thing. In your experience, was there anything that you don't feel like you in your time in ROTC were prepared for active duty wise, that you learned at a later time and that you maybe tried to implement as an ROTC instructor?
So first of all, there's nothing ROTC can do to prepare everybody for everything that they're going to experience on active duty. That shock factor comes sooner for some than others. Those folks that go off to undergraduate pilot training or things like that, that first time they step to the jet or they take their dollar ride or something like that, ROTC could never prepare them for that. But they can prepare them to be good individuals, again, people of character, airmen of character, guardians of character, leaders of character. So when those moments come, especially those good moments, that they can celebrate in a great way. Then there's going to be those moments of crisis. And so we remember at PT today, Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman was saying, most of the cadets in the program now weren't even alive during 9/11. And so, when you're asked to take a pause of silence, a moment of silence for that, there's that personal experience does not exist. But your crisis will happen, and so you will learn, and you will grow through those crises. So for me, the first crisis, the first real crisis was 9/11, and Lieutenant Colonel Hoffman said, those of us who are on active duty know exactly where we were on that morning. And I can tell you exactly where I was on that morning. I was standing in the office of the commander of Air Force Special Operations Command. I was his aide-de-camp. And in a moment, literally in a moment of seconds to minutes, when we realized that the planes going into the World Trade Center was not an accident, but was intentional, we went from a nation at peace to a nation at crisis, and then within only a couple of weeks, a nation at war, of which that war, at least in Afghanistan, just ended last week. And so there's no way that ROTC could have ever prepared me for that moment, with the exception of it gave me the tools that I then used and didn't realize I had until I was in that moment. In ROTC, through the leadership experiences, through the camaraderie, through the friendships that you make, through the lessons that you learn, through the things that you study, that's the foundation. And that foundation, you need to make sure that it's a solid foundation, because everything that you build on during your career is going to rest on that foundation. If it is a foundation of sand, it will sink. The more time you put into the Air Force or the Space Force, the taller your structure gets, the heavier it is, the deeper you're going to sink into that sand. And so what I got out of ROTC at Purdue was that foundation of just do right. And did I always know what right looked like? No. Do we all know what right looks like? No. Sometimes in hindsight you know what it looks like, but in the moment do you know what it looks like? But being able to take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your friends, and understand the oath that you take, because all of us voluntarily take that oath. Do you really understand the oath that you're taking, or are you just repeating back words somebody's saying to you? And so when you understand all of that, that's that foundation. And if that foundation is solid, then when those crises come up, then you'll be able to grow and evolve. And as you grow and evolve in your own, in the way you think, in the way you respond, in the way you lead, in the way you follow, in the way everything and all of our core values, you'll be a better person because of it. So ROTC is just the foundation, but the adventures that are ahead of you guys are just incredible. There's no way to be able to tell you all of those things that you're going to do. How can I say that? Is there a cadet that's in ROTC right now that actually will step foot on Mars? How do I know that? Chances are there probably could be. But I can tell you that all of those who choose to, who actually complete this journey as part of ROTC and get on to active duty, whether it's Mars or the United States or name your other country, you're definitely going to do something that you weren't planning on. And when you're in that moment, are you going to enjoy the moment, or are you going to let the moment enjoy you? Which one would you rather choose?
So one thing that we've kind of been doing with our guests on the podcast, and that I kind of want to give you a chance to speak on before we close out on today's. I think you kind of just hit on it a little bit, but if you could speak right now to a cadet that's either a brand new 100 and they don't necessarily know if they're in the right place yet, or someone who's not even a cadet but just expresses interest in ROTC, what would you say to that person? Maybe not necessarily from a recruiting standpoint, but just from a genuine ROTC instructor and leader perspective.
Yeah. So for every cadet we have in the program, we have different reasons why that cadet is there in that program. Some of them are doing it because that's all they ever wanted to do. They're associated with the military in some way, fashion, some form or fashion, and that's all they ever want to do. I will tell you that I run into cadets all the time. They have been passionate about flying since they were, since before they could walk, or as they learned to walk, and they remembered that far back. All they want to do is fly, and the way for them to get to fly is through the Air Force. And so they're there. You obviously know they're there. They're there because they want to be a pilot, and that's awesome. The Air Force needs that. Okay. Then there are those that are there because of scholarship opportunities, and that's the way for them to be able to pay for their education. And they don't know what the adventure is, and some of them are. I can't tell you how many times that you listen to somebody who's getting ready to retire after 20 plus years. And they'll say, my intent was just to get the education benefits, and then I was going to leave after 4 years. And they end up staying an entire career. Then you have folks that, cadets that somebody's pushing them into the program, whether it's a family member, a friend, or their friends are in the program, and they just want to be a part of the program so that they can be a part of their friends. And we could go down 15,000 other reasons why somebody's in ROTC. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all doing it for the same goal and objective. We have different reasons of why we got into the program, and never forget what those reasons are. But once we get through the program, and while we're developing our skills in the program, you're doing it for one reason and one reason only, and that is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And when you understand that, everything else becomes easy. Because then, why are we doing this? Because it's part of what you need to know in order to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Is there a better way to do it? If there is, help us find out what it is. Why should I do what you're telling me to do? Because at the end of the day, we're all doing the same thing and we're raising our right hand for the same reason, and that is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. You may not fully understand it now, but you will at some point in time in your career be reminded of exactly why you're doing it. When you get asked to go someplace that you know is harmful, you know is risky, you're going to leave your family behind, you're going to miss events, whether it's a birthday or a holiday or anything along those lines, and you're doing something that you prefer you're not doing in a place that you would prefer not to be. But while you're there, you're doing it to the absolute best of your ability with a positive attitude, and you are creating the effect that your nation has asked you to do. Why are you doing it? Because we are the ones who stepped up and said, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. When you get all of that, everything else is easy. Then you can just enjoy the ride.
So why being that key word that you were using in there is, as I think from a cadet perspective, is just so important, because you're going to face so many hardships throughout your 4 years. And like I said, challenges are always going to bring you a lot of good in developing, but just kind of understanding that why, of being able to get back to why I'm here, why I'm passionate about what I'm doing, it helps you get through so much that you might not be able to if you're just kind of, like you said, you don't know yet. So I think that's about all the time we have for today's podcast. Again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to share your experiences with us and stories, and give us this breadth of information that you've given us today. I know our Cadet Corps is very excited to have you at our lead lab today, and thankful for you taking out, again, more time for us to do that, as you did for us at PT this morning. It was really cool. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's podcast. Thank you guys for joining in with us and listening in to Colonel Ramsby as he gave us some excellent information and expertise on kind of just the different areas of the military that you might experience here in ROTC and then afterwards in your active duty. But thank you, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having